Hi everyone, it's Professor Clark, and in this lecture we are going to get into past active participles. So in the previous lecture we talked about present active participles, and now we're going to talk about past active participles. So as you recall, present active participles can only be formed from imperfective verbs, but past active participles can be formed from either perfective or imperfective verbs. So when we form them from perfective verbs, they mean the one who did something. Like, przeczytawszy knigę student is the student who read the book. And when they are formed from imperfective verbs, they mean the one who was doing something. Like, czytawszy student, the student who was reading. Like present active participles, past active participles can be formed from both transitive and intransitive verbs. So because they refer to the one doing the action, we can make them from either transitive or intransitive verbs. So how do we form them? We start by finding the masculine past tense. So czytać would be czytal, napisać, napisal, leć, lёg, and привыкнуть, to get used to, is привык. Step 2 is to remove the L that marks the masculine past tense if it is present. So we end up with czyta, napisa, and then lёg and привык, which are the same because they don't have an L. If the stem ends in a vowel once we remove the L, so czyta or napisa are examples, we're going to add v, sh, plus adjectival endings. So we could get, for instance, czytawszy or napisawszy. And note that we write v, but because it is immediately followed by sh, which is unvoiced, the v is going to devoice as well and is pronounced fa. So czytawszy, napisawszy. Also note that because sh is hard, the e that we write after it is going to be pronounced more like an e. If, however, the stem ends in a consonant, so velar stem verbs and some nuts verbs are going to end in a consonant, as, for example, leć becomes lёg and привыкнуть becomes привык, we're just going to add sh and then the adjectival ending. So we get, for instance, lёgszy, the one who lay down, привыкszy, the one who became accustomed to something. Note, however, that et verbs have a special past active participle form, which is szedszy. So et is going to become szol in the masculine past tense, but the participle is szedszy, the one who was walking or going. And if we have a prefixed form of et, it's going to be the same. We're just going to add the prefix to szedszy. So we have priti becomes przyszedszy, uiti becomes uszedszy, and naiti becomes naszedszy. So that is irregular in its own way, but at the same time it's completely regular. All et verbs are going to take this szedszy form. Past active participles can also be formed from reflexive verbs, just like they can be from unreflexive verbs. And in this case, as in the case of present active participles, the reflexive particle sia is always going to be sia, regardless of whether it's preceded by a consonant or a vowel. So uczyca is going to become uczywszy, which is what you would expect because ikrakoi is a consonant, but the feminine form uczywszaja is also sia, even though it's preceded by ya, which is a vowel, or uczywszy, it's still sia, even though it's preceded by ye, which is a vowel. The same thing when we look at zanimatsa. Zanimavshisya, zanimavshayasya, zanimavshiasya. It's always sia. So some examples we could have are студенты, учившиеся на этой программе в прошлом году, теперь учатся в аспирантуре. The students who were studying in this program last year are now studying in grad school. Or занимавшиеся в библиотеке студенты теперь ужинают в столовой. The students who were studying in the library are now having dinner in the cafeteria. So let's talk about stress in past active participles. Stress in past active participles is the same as in the infinitive, and most of the time that's also going to be the same as in the masculine past tense, but note how it works in these chats and nyats verbs. If you remember from last semester, chats and nyats verbs have a particular pattern of shifting stress in the past tense, which they do not have in past active participles. They do not have a shifting stress. They maintain their stress on the same syllable as in the infinitive. So nachat, for example, becomes nachal in the masculine past tense, but nachavshi as a past active participle. Nachatsa becomes nachalsya in the past tense, but is nachavshisya as a past active participle. Panyats becomes ponyal in the masculine past tense, but is panyavshi as a past active participle, and zanyats becomes zanyal in the masculine past tense, but is zanyavshi as a past active participle. So it's actually really straightforward. The stress stays wherever it is in the infinitive, even if it shifts in the actual past tense. Also, if a yor appears in the masculine past tense, it will be preserved in the past active participle. For example, liech becomes lyok in the masculine past tense and is lyokshi. Ispiech becomes ispyok, and then the past active participle is ispyokshi. However, note that this is not the case in some verbs of motion. So iti, as we already learned, becomes shol in the masculine past tense, but the past active participle is shidshi. Similarly, viesti becomes viol in the masculine past tense, but is viedchi as the past active participle. So now that we know how to form past active participles and active participles in general, let's talk a little bit about how to use them. So we've already discussed this a little bit, but participles agree with the noun they modify in gender, number, and case, and this is different from katuri. So if we look at a couple of examples, we can say, for example, "Я увидела человека, шедшего по улице." And that is the same thing as «Я увидела человека, который шел по улице». They mean basically the same thing, but note that in the first example, where we have a participial clause, the participle matches the noun that it refers to in case as well as gender, человека шедшего. Whereas when we have katori is in the nominative, even though it refers to a noun that is in the accusative. Я увидела человека, который шел по улице. Or я познакомился со студентом, окончившим этот университет. That means the same thing as я познакомился со студентом, который окончил этот университет. But notice that in the first example with the participial clause, the participle окончившим is also in the instrumental case, just like the noun that it refers to. Whereas with the katori clause, katori is in the nominative, even though it refers to a noun in the instrumental. And whenever we have active participles, whether present or past active participles, if we turn them into katori clauses, the katori will always be in the nominative. So whatever case the actual noun is in, if you take a participial clause and you turn it into a katori clause, katori will always be in the nominative if it is an active participle. Because remember, active participles refer to the one doing the action. They refer to the subject of the verb. And then, second of all, participles can be used either after the noun they modify, in which case they will be separated from it by a comma, or they can be used like any other adjective and placed before it, and they are not separated from it by a comma. So that might seem a little confusing. Let's look at some examples. We can say, Я познакомилась со студентами, учащимися в этом университете. I became acquainted, I met some students who are studying in this university or who are going to school here in this college. And that is the same as Я познакомилась с учащимися в этом университете студентами. That might seem like a very complicated sentence to an English speaker. To a Russian speaker, it is not so complicated, although again, you are largely going to use this kind of construction in formal written Russian. However, in formal written Russian, it's very, very, very common. And the two things are the same. Я познакомилась со студентами, учащимися в этом университете. So the participle comes after the noun and is separated from it by a comma. Or я познакомилась с учащимися в этом университете студентами. The participle is before the noun and is not separated from it by a comma. And note that if there's anything else in the phrase or the clause that goes with the participle, it also goes before the noun. So we have с учащимися в этом университете студентами. With the studying at this university students. That is how you say it in Russian. It makes a lot more sense to them than it might to us. And again, it might seem complicated to us, but because of the case system, it's not at all confusing to Russian speakers. Another example could be Я знал учившихся в этом университете студентов. I knew students who were studying at this university. And that is the same as Я знал студентов, учившихся в этом университете. Again, these are exactly the same. We have just reorganized the words. So in the first example, Я знал учившихся в этом университете студентов, we put the participle and anything that goes with it before the noun, and we do not separate it from the noun with a comma. Whereas in the second example, Я знал студентов, учившихся в этом университете, we put the participle after the noun and we do separate it from the noun with a comma. So there you go. If it seems a little overwhelming, remember that this is mainly used in written Russian, so you can get by as a non-native Russian speaker by not actually using these forms actively a lot of the time, but you do need to be able to understand them passively because they're used very, very, very commonly in things like newspaper articles, journal articles, and any kind of literary Russian. So there you go. I hope you found that helpful. And next we will move on to passive participles.